Namaskar, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors, professionals, listeners, learners. I welcome respected doctors and directors. I welcome Honourable advocates, advertisers, administrators and advisors. I welcome Honourable Minister N Managers. I welcome the most honorable President Professor Modi ji. It's really nice time, nice place, nice section today. That we are inspiring, exciting, motivating, appreciating all listeners, those who are preparing themselves for appearing in any kind of competition. How literature and language help us in understanding our constitution. It is really a matter of discussion because without knowing our literature, our holy scriptures, we cannot know completely our constitution. For the complete understanding of our constitution, for knowing completely about the laws, rules and regulations of our nation, it is very necessary to know the basic scriptures, holy books of our own holy religions of this holy land. So let us go through the literature. What is written in literature? For knowing the Indian and international and even world's constitution. Literature is the mirror of our society. It is a society not of any particular country or nation, but it shows, it expresses culture, society, lifestyle of the different people of the different countries. How the different people in the world spend their time, how is their food, how is their culture, what kind of clothes they wear according to the different climate or culture. It is known by the literature. So literature is essential part of study. History is the part of literature. Science is the part of literature. And the study that we do, that is a part of literature. Without literature and history, we cannot know the stories, our past, our problems. So for that we must go through the literature of the different nations friends, today let us go through the literature that is essentially to be read by our scholars of English literature, essentially to be read. Let us start 16th and 17th century literature. Let us know first of all about some literary terms like blank verse. Different poets of the different type have written different product of the literature, and they used different type of measurements, parameters, quantities, as well as qualities. Blank verse is the literary term. What is blank verse? Let us know it completely today. This is a type of poem that is written with a meter but has no rhyme scheme. The meter of a blank verse poem is typically the iambic pentameter. Blank verse is a frequently used form of poetry. It was used widely by poets such as William Shakespeare and John Milton. As earlier yesterday we have described William Shakespeare, who is known as the father and founder of dramas. John Milton can be compared with the Indian C.R.D.A.V because of their mystic and spiritual insight. Both they felt spiritual experiences. These poets used blank verse for long, narrative-based poems, which commonly featured a dramatic monologue. Since the 60s, blank verse has remained a popular form of poetry and was used by poets such as Robert Frost and W.B.Yeats during the 20th century. All the literary scholars have read that Robert Frost, who has written very important poem, verses, that was most probably used to say, kept by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, first Prime Minister of India. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. But I have promises, miles to go before I sleep. What a beautiful poetic lines were written by Robert Frost for inspiring our youth, for focusing, for providing objective, ambition, goals of our life. Let us take examples and poems. Now that we understand the two key characteristics of blank verse, let us look at some example of this form. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground well under it and spills the upper borders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. Robert Frost's poem Mending Wall, which it was written by him in 1914, when there was World War, the whole countries of the world were busy preparing themselves for fighting against each other. It is a widely known example of blank verse. The poem is written in iambic pentameter as evident by the five, five iambs in each line. There is also no rhythm, there is also no rhyme scheme. Frost uses blank verse in this poem to mimic the structure of the word. Blank verse allows the poem to be written without stanza breaks, and so if the poem is tipped on its side, it resembles the shape of a wall. Turning and turning in the widening gyres, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. William Butler Yeats uses the blank verse in the poem The Second Coming. It was written by him in 1920. The poem discusses themes of religion and violence as well as Irish history. Yeats uses iambic pentameter in this poem. Though at times a line will contain 13 syllables instead of 10, it is thought that Yeats chooses to occasionally deviate from the meter to reflect the in fearful tone of uncertainty in the poem. Dear friends, some poets have expressed their ideas, thoughts, ambition by using the parameter of sonnets. It is well known by the English scholars that a 14-line poem is known as a sonnet. But let us go today from the philosophical and psychological point of view. As William Shakespeare have written maximum sonnets, philosophically and psychologically, although less scientifically, units sonnets have been used in poetry for centuries. The first recorded sonnet was written in Italy in the 12th century. The Italian sonnet was developed during the Renaissance, called the Petrarchan sonnet after the Italian sonnet. Francisco Petrarca, who popularized the form, during the 16th and 17th centuries. The sonnet was developed by various poets including William Shakespeare and Edmund Spenser. The two poets created separate forms of the sonnet known as Shakespearean sonnet and Spenserian sonnet. Since the 16th century, poets have developed the construction. Poets have developed the connection between sonnets and the concept of love, using the form to discuss love in its many different forms, including spiritual love, sexual love, and aesthetic love. Because of this close connection, poets have also used the form to subvert readers' expectations about love. What are sonnet form? While there are different types of sonnets, they all follow the same three basic characteristics. This is a strict structure that all sonnets must follow. 14 lines. All sonnets must consist of 14 lines. However, these lines can be presented differently according to the type of sonnet by dividing them up into octave. Octave means 8 line stanza. Sestate means 6 line stanza. Quatrains means 4 line stanza or couplet means 2 line stanza. How these lines are structured is a key way to spot what type of sonnet you are reading. Iambic pentameter. What is iambic pentameter? Sonnets must be written in a type of metric line called iambic pentameter. When a line is written in iambic pentameter, it will consist of 5 musical feet or iambs that begin with an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. What is lyric? Lyric poetry is traditionally accompanied by music. As we have read that there was French Revolution in 1789, so there was no peace of mind, tranquility of heart. At that time, William Shakespeare and S.K.G.V, with their collective venture, they started writing lyrical ballads in 1798 and addressed the people that nature is our true lover. All worldly people may deceive, cheat, defeat us, but nature never betray, defeat, cheat, and deceive us. It was addressed by William Shakespeare and S.K.G.V. So, lyrical poem is a musical poem. The name lyric takes its origins from the ancient Greek instrument, the lyres. A lyre is a small harp-shaped string instrument. As a result, lyric poems are often thought of as long. As a result, lyric poems are often thought of as song-like. Lyric poetry is normally short poems where the speaker expresses their emotions or feelings. Traditional classical Greek lyric poetry had strict rules for rhyme and meter. Today, lyric poetry encompasses many forms with different rules regarding how they are structured. In ancient Greece, lyric poetry was seen as an alternative to dramatic verse and epic poetry. These forms both contain a narrative. Lyric poetry did not necessitate narrative, allowing poets to concentrate on a speaker's feelings and emotions. Lyric poems have always been considered emotional and expressive. Many different poetry forms are considered to be lyric poetry. The sonnet, ode, and elegy are famous examples of poetry forms that fall under the category of lyric. This can make lyric poetry difficult to classify. Lyric poetry, what are its characteristics? It can be difficult to define lyric poetry due to the wide range of poetic styles it encompasses. Though these, there are some common themes found in most lyric poetry. They are often short, expressive, and song-like. Here are some common characteristics. The first important feature of the lyric poetry is the first person. Often lyric poems are written in the first person because of their expressive nature and the exploration of emotion and feelings. The first person poem, the first person point of view allows the speaker of the poem to express their innermost thoughts on a chosen subject. Often the poems will speak of love or adoration, and the use of the first person point of view enhances its intimacy. Second feature is length. Lyric poetry is usually short. If the lyric poem happens to be a sonnet, it will contain 14 lines. If it is a villain, if it is a villain, then it would contain 90. The poetry form of the ode is normally longer and could contain up to 50 lines. Lyric poems do not have to follow the strict rules of these forms, and although their length can vary, they are usually short. Its third feature is song like. Lyric poem is always found in song like, in the form of song. Considering its origins, it should be no surprise that lyric poetry is considered song-like. Lyric poems use many different techniques that make them sound like song. They can sometimes use rhyme schemes and verses, techniques used in modern day music. Lyric poetry often uses repetition and meter, which will give the poems a rhythmic quality. What is meter? Most lyric poetry uses some form of meter. Meter in poetry is a regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. In the Elizabethan sonnet, iambic pentameter is the most common form, Iambic pentameter is the use of one unstressed level followed by one that is stressed. Their pairs of syllables are collectively known as feet. Other forms may use uh, dactylic meter like the traditional algae. Now let us discuss hyperbole. What is hyperbole? Simply it means to exaggerate. An extreme exaggeration used to make a point, often humorously. In the catcher, in the RA, narrator, Holden, Caulfield often uses hyperbole to exaggerate its circumstances. At Banshee, you either froze to death or died of the heat. What is conceit? Conceit was first used as a term to refer to the extended metaphors used in certain types of poetry. It applies to two main schools, the Petrarchan and the metaphysical conceit. Let's take a look at some examples. Petrarchan conceit. Francesco Petrarch was a poet who wrote in the 14th century. During the early Renaissance, considered the creator of the Petrarchan sonnet. He also made extensive use of conceit as it as a poetic device. The Petrarchan kind of conceit compares the physical attributes of a woman, usually a lover, to celestial bodies and other grand symbols of beauty. Petrarch used a straightforward Petrarchan conceit in his sonnet 90. Sweet notes and wavering lights beyond measure would burn in those beautiful eyes which are now so dim, and it seemed to me in her face was the color of pity. I do not know whether false or true. I who had the lure of love in my breast, what wonder if I suddenly caught fire? Her way of moving was no mortal thing, but of angelic form, and her speech rang higher than a mere human voice. A celestial spirit, a living sun was that I saw. And if she is not such now, the wound's not healed, although the bow is slack. Here Petrarch describes his now dead lover's eyes as being better than the radiant waist. Radiant is about as bright as you get, so the poem implies that her eyes are bright beyond description. Her work is described as more than merely mortal, inferring that she is a higher being, which is further emphasized by the divine among the Jari folk. Later Renaissance era Petrarchan conceits tended to be more rooted in purely physical descriptions. A subversion of the theme, if not the form, Shakespeare's Sonnet 130, 1609 marks the hyperbolic competitions in Petrarch's Sonnet 90. The speaker admits his lover is not only mortal and that her breath weak, but also says that he believes his love to be as real as one's with render comparisons. Alliterations. The repetition of an initial consonant sound in words that are close together, such as within a single sentence or line of poetry. The third stanza of Emily Dickens, a narrow fellow in the class, uses alliteration in both the second and third lines. He likes a bogey acre, a floor too cool for fun, but when a boy and therefore one more than once at noon. But it's simply a figure of speech in which two objects are directly compared, usually including either like or as in the comparison. The Romantic poets were especially fond of similes, as in the title of William Wordsworth's poem, I wandered lonely as a cloud. What is metaphor? A figure of speech that features a comparison between two disparate things that are not literally the same. Unlike similes, metaphors do not use the words like or whereas. Shakespeare, Shakespeare's plays make frequent use of metaphors, many of which have become famous. The lines below as a metaphor to compare the world to a theatre in which people are the actors or players. All the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. What is allegory? A literary work in which nearly all of the characters, events, settings, and other digital elements of the story have a second symbolic meaning. In most cases, allegories advance a very clear and moral lesson. George Orwell's Animal Farm is an allegory in which the barnyard animals who oversee the farmer and take over the farm represent the Russian Revolution and its aftermath. What's tragedy? Tragedy is a genre. Tragedy is a genre in which, in drama, tragedy is a genre in drama that expresses serious issues. A tragic play is usually about a hero or heroine who goes through trials and tribulations that don't lead to a happy resolution. Most tragedies end with death and destruction. Plays in the category of tragedy often raise important questions about the human condition. A tragedy is a play that revolves around a tragic hero who causes suffering to themselves and others because of either an inner flaw or external circumstances beyond their control. whether the hero is fighting a human villain, a supernatural force, or something that symbolizes evil. Our tragedy's ending is never happy. Tragedies are not stories of triumphant victories. They are, they are stories that show us how difficult life can be, but also remind us of the strength we have. Tragedies often have moral messages. However, some tragedies are more ambiguous and make us question things without providing a clear answer. In both cases, a tragedy is a drama that deals with the fundamental theme of what it means to be human. What is soliloquy? A monologue given by a character in a play at a time when the character is alone or believes no other characters are present. Like many playwrights, Shakespeare typically uses soliloquy to reveal a character's internal dilemmas. Hamlet's speech that begins to be or not to be, that is the question, is perhaps the most famous soliloquy in English literature. Now let us discuss the elevation age from 1558 to 1603. As yesterday we have discussed the starting of the Elizabethan age, we can say it was the time of 14th and 15th century period when there was the birth of William Shakespeare in 1564 and there was the birth of Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, start of Sikhism. According to Indian mythology, he born in 1469 and East India Company established its business in 1600. So these dates are very important because of the starters, initiators, creators, beginners, generators of the dark age spiritually. Now, similarly, we are discussing here the Elizabethan age. According to English literature, it is assumed that it was started in 1558. Elizabethan age, also known as the golden age of English literature, is a period in English history that spans the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603. In between, there was also the birth of William Shakespeare in 1564, who is known as the father and founder of dramas. This period was marked by a great flourishing of English culture, particularly in the arts and literature. Some of the key characteristics of the Elizabethan age include strong national spirit. The Elizabethan era was a time of great national pride and patriotism. This was partly due to England's victory over Spain in the Spanish Armada in 1588. Renewed interest in classical learning. During the Elizabethan era, interest in the literature and culture of ancient Greece and Rome increased. This was due to this was due in part to the invention of printing. This was due in part to the invention of printing, which made classical text more widely accessible. Focus on humanism. The Elizabethan era was a time of great intellectual and artistic ferment. The central philosophy of the time was humanism, which emphasized the importance of the individual and human potential, flowering of the arts. The Elizabethan era saw a great flowering of the arts, particularly in the fields of literature, theatre, and music. Some of the greatest writers and artists in English history lived during this period, including William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, and Ben Jonson. Emphasis on education. Education was very important in the Elizabethan era. Many people believed that education was the key to a better future. Protestant Reformation. The Elizabethan era was a time of great religious upheaval. England had recently separated from the Catholic Church and founded its own Protestant church. This led to much religious discussion and controversy. Exploration and colonization. The Elizabethan era was a time of great exploration and colonization. English sailors and explorers traveled to all parts of the world, including America, Africa, and Asia. Patronage of the arts. Queen Elizabeth I was a great patron of the arts and supported many writers and artists. This led to a flourishing of literature and culture during his reign. The rise of theatre. Theatre enjoyed great popularity in the Elizabethan era, and many famous playwrights emerged during this period, including William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson. The Jacobean Age, 1603 to 1625. The Jacobean Age is a period in English history ranging from 1603 to 1625 during the reign of King James I. It is named after King James, who was also King James VI from Scotland. Darker and more cynical tone. Jacobean literature is often darker and more cynical than Elizabethan literature. This is partly because the Jacobean era was a time of great political and religious unrest. Folks showed darker side of human nature. Jacobean writers wanted to explore the darker side of human nature, particularly on themes such as greed, lust, and violence. Fascination with the supernatural. Jacobean literature is often characterized by a fascination with the supernatural. In fact, the Jacobean era was a time of great uncertainty and superstitions. The later works of William Shakespeare, such as Hamlet, Macbeth, and King Lear, the metaphysical poetry of John Donne, the works of Ben Jonson, such as Walpole and the Alchemist, the Essays of Francis Bacon, the works of John Lobster, such as the Duchess of Malfi and the White David. Patron of the arts. King James I was a great patron of the arts and supported many writers and artists. However, he was a stricter ruler than Queen Elizabeth I, which had a certain influence on the literature of the time. Origin of the court masque. The court masque was a very popular form of theatrical entertainment in the Jacobean period. Court masks were often elaborate and artistic representations commemorating the king and his court. Growth of the middle class. During the Jacobean era, the middle class grew in size and influence, which led to a growing demand for literature that was not written for the elites. As a result, there was a rise in popular genres such as satire and emphasizes. Satire and pamphlets. Continuing the Elizabethan emphasis on humanism and individualism. Jacobean writers were interested in the human condition and explored the full range of human emotions. They often wrote about interpersonal relationships, love, loss, and faith. They also emphasized individuality and the importance of self-expression. Shift from optimism to pessimism. Jacobean written Jacobean writers were less optimistic about human potential than Elizabethan writers. They were more interested in the darker side of human nature, such as sin, violence, and death. This change in mood is reflected in many Jacobean tragedies, such as Shakespeare's Hamlet and Macbeth. Courtly focus. The Jacobean court was a center of culture and learning, and Jacobean writers often wrote for court audiences. This resulted in a more refined and intellectual writing style. The rise of satire. Satire was a popular genre in the Jacobean period. Jacobean writers used satire to criticize the social and political issues of the time. The most famous Jacobean satirists include Ben Jonson and John Donne. What is metaphysical poetry? Metaphysical poetry is a type of poetry characterized by a complex and intellectual style. Metaphysical poets often used concepts, which are elaborate metaphors that compare two seemingly unrelated things. The most famous metaphorical poets are John Donne, Andrew Marvell, and John Milton. What is Jacobean drama? Jacobean drama is known for its dark and tragic themes. Jacobean playwrights often wrote about violence, death, and revenge. The most famous Jacobean playwrights are William Shakespeare, John Webster, and Thomas Middleton. New interest in science and research. Jacob's time was also a time of great interest in science and research. There is evidence in the works of writers such as Sir Francis Bacon and Robert Burton. Patronage of arts. King James I was a great patron of the arts and supported many writers and artists. This led to a further flourishing of literature and culture during his reign. Origin of masque. The masque was a form of courtly entertainment that became very popular in Jacob's time. The masks were often allegorical and featured elaborate costumes and decorations. Bible translation. In 1611, the King James Bible was published. This translation is still widely used and is considered one of the most important work of English literature. What is an ode? An ode is a poem that is usually written in praise of a particular person, thing, or event, and that contains lines of different lengths and meters. It is a name given to a long lyric poem that often begins with an invocation or an address. The tone is generally dignified and elaborated in stanzic structure. The subject matter is also serious. Originally, it was the poem suitable for singing, but the term has usually been restricted to a special king of poem. Greek poet Pindar introduced this form of poem, hence many odes written on that pattern are known as Pindaric odes. However, the Romantic poets used this form in slightly different ways. Keats' Ode to Autumn and Dryden's Ode to Saint Cecilia's are good examples of this type of poetry. What is imagery? Imagery in any sort of writing refers to descriptive language that engage the human senses. For example, the following lines from Robert Frost's poem After Apple Picking contain imagery that engages the senses of touch, movement, and hearing. I feel the ladder sway as the box bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bill, or the rumbling sonal, or of loud on Lord of Apple coming in. What is algae? Algae is an elaborate, mournful lamentation for the dead. In Greek and Latin verses, however, the term refers to the meter of the sorrowful poem. It often included love poems too, like John Donne's love poems. Elegiac meter consists of a line of dactylic hexameter followed by one pentameter. A few algaes are Gray's algae written in a country churchyard, Shelley's Adonis, Tennyson in memoriam, Milton's Lycidas, and Walt Whitman's When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. Algae is a form of poetic composition that serves as lamentation set to music. The origin of such form could be traced in ancient Greek literary work, when it was both mournful and grave, when it was both mournful and gay. But later on, it came to be regarded as a mourning song. The course of lamentation varied in the manner It caught the imagination of the poet. The algae is less spontaneous than a lyric or an ode. As a rule, it is usually elaborate and descriptive in style. It normally serves as homage to a person that appeals the poet's concern. What is personification? Personification is a type of figurative language in which non-human beings are described as having human attributes as in the sentence. The rain poured down the wedding guests, indifferent to their plans. Describing the rain as indifferent is an example of personification because rain cannot be indifferent nor can it feel any other human emotion. However, saying that the rain feels indifferent poetically emphasizes the cruel turning of the rain. Personification can help writers to create more vivid descriptions. So make readers see the word in new ways and to more powerfully capture the human experience of the word. Since people really do often interpret the non-human entities of the world as having human traits. What is William? What is willing suspension of disbelief? Willing suspension of disbelief. It is a term coined in 1870 by the poet and aesthetic philosopher Samuel Taylor Coleridge, S.T. Coleridge, who suggested that if a writer could infuse a human interest and a remembrance of truth into a fantastic tale, the reader would suspend judgment concerning the implausibility of the narrative. Suspension of disbelief often applies to fictional works of the action, comedy, fantasy, and horror genres. Cognitive entrainment in fiction involves using a person's ignorance or lack of knowledge to promote suspension of disbelief. The phrase suspension of disbelief came to be used more loosely in the later 20th century, often used to imply that the burden was on the reader rather than the writer to achieve it. This might be used to refer to the willingness of the audience to overlook the limitation of a medium so that these do not interfere with the acceptance of those premises. These fictional premises may also lead to the engagement of the mind and perhaps proposition of thoughts, ideas, art, and theories. Now let us discuss what is meter. Meter is the Greek name of measurement. The Greek name of measurement, thus that measurement is a meter. It thus becomes a unit or standard of measurement and it is repeated a number of times in a given verse. Therefore, the recurrence of regular or nearby equal units of rhythmical patterns in poetry is called meters. The meter depends on the pattern of unstressed, unaccented, stressed, accented syllables. The most popular meter is iambic, which has an unstressed syllable following a stressed syllable. Trochaic has a stressed syllable followed by unstressed one. In anapestic meter, two unstressed syllables are followed by a stressed one. In dactylic meter, a stressed syllable is followed by two unstressed syllables. What is couplet? Couplet are lines of iambic pentameter which rhyme in pairs AA, BB, and so on. The adjective was applied in the later 17th century because of the frequent use of such couplets in the heroic, that is, epic poems and plays. This verse form was introduced into English poetry by Geoffrey Chaucer in the Legend of Good Women and most of the canterbury dates, and has been in constant employment ever since, from the age of Dryden to that of Dr. Johnson. The heroic couplet became the predominant English measure for all poetic kinds. Some poets, including Alexander Pope, used it almost to the exclusion of other meters. Thus, the this neoclassic period, the poet wrote in dosed couplets. That it, the end of each couplet tends to coincide with the end either of a sentence or of a self-contained unit of syntax. The sustained employment of the closed heroic couplet meant that two lines had to solve something of the function of the stanza in order to maximize the interrelations of the component parts. Neoclassic poet often used an end stopped first line that is made the line coincide with a pause in the syntax and broke each single line into subnets by balancing it around a strong caesura or medical pause in the syntax. What are the Picaresque novels? A Picaresque novel is a genre of prose fiction that depicts a roguish hero who experiences episodic adventures. This Picaresque hero has rough qualities and is usually from a low social class. Despite this, the hero is also appealing. Traditionally made, he has to navigate society with his wits. The novel also usually includes satiric and or comedic elements of novels that include one or only a few of these elements will also be referred to as Picaresque novels. The first Vikas novel is to be Ledger Below Day Thorn, published in 1554 and perhaps written by Daigo Huratago de Mondozo. Although some scholars have expressed doubt in regard to that attribution, the book details a poor boy, Lazaro, who works under seven lay and clerical masters, each of whom was something secretive in their personality. The novel is considered to be one of the most widely read read books of all time. Comedy of Manners. The Comedy of Manners is a comedic genre that satirizes the social behavior and values of a particular class or group. Often the upper classes, this type of comedy gained popularity in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, often taking aim at the insincerity and shallowness of the British aristocracy. The genre uses wit, wordplay, and irony to highlight the absurdities of social conventions, manners, and attitudes of the time. Characters in the comedy of manners often well educated, cynical, and manipulative with their dialogue and actions, revealing hypocrisy, vanity, and pretension. The humor arises. The humor arises from the conflict between the character, public persons, and their private motivations and desires. Despite its historical context, the comedy of manners is still relevant today as social conventions and values continue to evolve and be challenged. The genre provides a cue to reflect on and critique societal norms with humor and wit, making it a valuable tool for creative writers to explore contemporary issues and attributes. Bildugas Roman novel. Bildugas Roman novel is a genre of novel that shows a young protagonist's journey from childhood to adulthood or immaturity to maturity with a focus on the trials and misfortunes that affects the character's growth. The Bildugas Roman typically begins with a protagonist who feels alienated and alone, but ends on a positive note with the character finding a sense of belonging or self-realization. Though many authors have played with this idea. What is satire? Satire may be defined as a literary composition whose principal aim is to ridicule folly or vice. It is a light form of composition. It is a light form of composition intended to keep the reader in a good humor even when it is at its most plastic. According to Dryden, the true end of satire is the amendment of vices by correction. Satire is found in both poetry and prose. Some very well known satires in English poetry are Dryden, Absalom, and Ashitaka. Was Dunciad and Byron's vision of judgment, Snuff's Battle of Books. Sentimental comedy. What is sentimental comedy? A genre of 18th century British drama. The sentimental comedy features middle class characters who triumphantly overcame a series of moral trials during the course of the play. Such comedy aimed at producing tears rather than laughter. Sentimental comedies reflected contemporary philosophical conceptions of humans as inherently good but capable of being led astray through bad example. By an appeal to his noble sentiment, a man would be reformed and set back on the path of virtue, although the play contained characters whose nature seemed overly virtuous and whose problems were too easily resolved. They were nonetheless accepted by audience as truthful representations of the human predicament. Writers of sentimental comedy included Colin Sieber and George Parker, with their respective plays, Love's Last Ship, 1696, and The Constant Couple, 1699. The best known sentimental comedy is Sir Richard Steele's The Conscious Lover, 1722, which deals with the trials and tribulations of its penniless heroine, Indiana. Periodical essay. A periodical essay is an essay that is a short work of non-fiction published in a magazine or journal in particular. An essay that appears in parts of series. 19th century is considered the great age of the periodical essay in English. Notable periodical essayists of the 18th century include Joseph Addison, Richard Steele, Samuel Johnson, and Oliver Goldsmith. Dear friends, tomorrow we will discuss neoclassical, the age of restoration. I thank all my brothers and sisters. I thank all teachers and trainers. I thank all professionals. I thank all listener learners. I thank the respected doctors and directors. I thank all honorable minister managers. I thank all honorable advocates, advertisers, administrators, and advisors. I thank the most honorable President Professor Modi. Thank, thank you.